This is an Audi S3 3rd generation or 8V, depending on what term you use. The awesome little car that is super reliable as well. Now if you're planning on buying one of these, make sure you watch this video because I'm going to show you all the common faults and help you get a good car. Let's go! So let's start at the business end. What tends to go wrong with this 2-litre engine? Well, not a lot to be honest, but here's some things you definitely want to check. First up, the thermostat housing. Now on early cars, these could leak. Now it wasn't a huge ordeal. It didn't leak enough that you were going to completely run out of coolant or it was going to cause damage to the water pump or anything like that. It was more an annoyance than anything else, but as I say, still something you want to be aware of. So how do we spot it? Well, the obvious one, have a look underneath the car and check for any coolant leaks. This component is mounted to the front of the engine, so check in that general vicinity. Now the other thing you can check as well is, get this, Audi's response to owners that were suffering this problem was to actually overfill the coolant reservoir. So if it's very high or very low, you can ask the seller what that's all about. That being said, the water pumps can have problems as well. And that's maybe a bit harsh because it's not a defect with the water pump itself, rather it's more the timing of this car. So the 8V S3 was one of the first that used a chain rather than the more traditional belt. Now what that meant was when you had to maintain or change a belt, typically the water pump got changed at the same time. When we changed over to the chain drive, that didn't require any maintenance, so quite often the water pump was overlooked and eventually, as everything does, it's going to expire. So if there's no receipt, no history of the water pump ever having been done, then budget that into the deal because chances are you're going to need to do it. So there's a few other engine related issues to tell you about, but these are best explored whilst we're on the road. So let's go. And what we'll do as well, we'll also chime in a different issue these cars can sometimes have, which is the Haldex. Now, easy way of spotting that is get it down to a lower gear, give it a blast. And what we're looking it's quite hard to talk when I'm doing that. What we're looking for there is to make sure that those rear wheels are interacting with the traction. Make sure the power is also being sent to the rear and that the fronts aren't just spinning away needlessly. Also make sure that the traction light isn't flashing too much. Now in Scotland, ideal conditions here for testing it because it's always bloody wet. So the last few things I want to mention relate to this awesome manual box that we've got. So there are unfortunately one or two more problems when it comes to that versus the DSG, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Now first up is a rattling that comes off of this gearbox, so give it a blast as we're doing here. Come off the throttle completely and let it decelerate. Now as it's decelerating, there shouldn't be any noise whatsoever. If you're getting a rattling, then walk away from that car, as there have been a few manual gearboxes in S3s that have required rebuilding. Now the other thing to mention, and again this relates to the manual only, is the clutches, particularly if the car's modified. Best way of spotting if the clutch is in good condition is get it into a slightly higher gear. So I'm doing about 40 miles an hour, 4th gear, put the foot down, and you can see that the propulsion, the speed of the car increases proportionately to the revs of the car. If the revs go shooting up, but you're not speeding up, then that clutch is slipping and it requires changing. Absolutely make sure you factor that into the bargain. Now when it comes to the DSGs, well, let's talk about it. So from factory, you could get these DSG gearboxes. Now up to 2017, what you're going to find is it's a 6-speed unit. Again, utterly reliable, no real problems to report there. Now in 2017 or 2018, if you're in the USA, that 6-speed unit changed over to the 7-speed unit. And again, utterly reliable, nothing really to report on that one. Now also, if you're looking for a manual car beyond 2017, you're out of luck, because they discontinued them with the release of that 7-speed gearbox. So next up, let's talk suspension. But before we get to that, a favour to ask from you guys. Now, we're waging war against dodgy car sellers that try and cover up faults with cars that you're buying. If you want to help us in this fight, best thing you can do is hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell notification, and also give this video a like as well. Anyway, suspension problems next. So quite early on in the production of these cars, Audi redesigned both the top mounts and the bump stops on the suspension. Now that was done to try and address a knocking sound coming from the rear over speed bumps or imperfect roads. So there's something else you can listen out for on that test drive as well. And as ever, if you're hearing it, not the end of the world, it can be rectified with those newer parts, but something to negotiate with, something to save you a bit of money, which is what this channel is all about. Now the other thing to bear in mind is that you could spec these S3s with the mag-ride suspension, and whilst it's not quite as unreliable as it is on some of the older Audis, they can still get problems. So do what you can to have a look under the car and in these wheel arches to look for leaking dampers, and also take any suspension fault messages on the dash very seriously. So if you've made it to this point, well done. One more problem to address here, and that is this. The rear wiper motor can sometimes fail. So again, a small thing, but make sure you try it, make sure it's working, and if not, bring that into the bargain as well. Now the last thing that I'll mention, again, not a problem as such here guys, but general bodywork condition. We want to make sure all is in good order. It is an enthusiast car, so it's going to have been driven enthusiastically as you would expect. So make sure those panel gaps are okay, make sure there's no real dodgy colour matches, basically just a good general check over. Now all that's left to do is rate this car on a reliability scale. So where does it score? Well, overall, a really solid, reliable car. However, some of those manual gearbox problems, some of the coolant leaks on earlier cars, definitely knocks a couple of points off. So we're rating this a massive 8 out of 10. Now, if you've got any questions about a car that you're looking to buy, or if you own one of these cars and you've got a question about a problem it's having, drop it in the comments below and we can come back to you. But for now, we'll see you on the next one.